Hi, Luke. Thank you for joining me today. I'm so excited to talk to you. For the listeners' benefit, I am joined by Luke, who is the founder of Sapien, and his catchphrase is people first, product led. Would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners, Luke?
That's it. Hey, Bryony. Thank you for having me, first and foremost. Yes, so I am Luke Omani, founder of Sapien X, actually. Everyone misses the X, but that's fine.
Oops, sorry.
No, it's totally fine. It's something that I've been discussing with my brand strategist for a while now. Like, do we make it more explicit? But the reason for that X there is because it's meant to be a multiplier, right? So the original Sapien X brand was around multiplying human potential and still remains that. So Sapien representing the human and the X as the multiplier representing the multiplication
Love
of
that.
our potential as a human species. So just a bit of nerdy context for the logo and branding there. But yeah, so my background is I spent 10 years plus over a decade in talent and people operations, and latterly I was head of people and operations in a payment solutions startup in Birmingham in the UK. And as I left that role, I started to think about how do I scale my impact? How do I take some of the things that I've learnt in that role and layer them with additional understanding and research now that I'm not operational and get that into the hands of first time heads of people leaders who need to start thinking slightly differently about the role of HR and the role that they play within a business and the role that the people function plays within a business more broadly. So people first, product led is my way of articulating that, which is we should be operating like mini product teams or even a micro startup within the wider business. And that's how we can start to drive a lot more impact and value rather than being seen as a support and administrative function.
And I find that particularly fascinating, actually, because you call it a post HR generation. And having come from quite a traditional, I didn't have a traditional route into HR, but I certainly had traditional experiences of HR. And looking at the statistics, there's a high number of women still in HR roles, and there's a very low number of both women and HR in board seats. Um, Tell me about the sentiment of post HR generation.
Yeah, so post HR generation is about moving beyond what's gone before in a very clear and decisive way. So what I don't think is helpful is to try and iterate and improve on the mechanisms of HR that aren't serving the business and aren't serving those of us in the profession. So it's trying to make a clean break and saying, actually, HR was one thing, and it served its purpose for the last few decades and it's got us to this point, but it's not going to take us to where we want to get to as a business, as professionals, and also from a position of joy within the workplace, right? So I layer everything I do with how do we bake in joy and delight into that people experience whilst maintaining focus on driving performance, which is crucial. We can't do one without the other. So the post HR generation for me is about a break from traditional ways of thinking and working. And as I say, if we want people to think differently about HR, we have to think differently in HR. So for me, that's what this is all about. It's encouraging, facilitating, and enabling the profession to move beyond traditional practices and into something that is very different. And I think you responded to my newsletter yesterday, but this idea of 0 to 1, like it's not enough to go from 1 to 10 or 10 to 100 in what already exists. We actually need to go from 0 to 1 and create something brand new for our profession.
And do you think that that's what has prevented the profession from being at the table a lot of the time or being in that leadership space, particularly the C suite?
I think the so I think what's prevented HR being taken seriously as a strategic business leader is the over policed and over emphasis on policy adherence and administration and the taking a role as a support function, like accepting that as our role. So, incorrectly setting the correct boundaries for one thing. So, are we defining our role? And when we are entering a business as the people person, are we having really specific conversations about what it is that we're there to do and what the business thinks that we're there to do? And I've spoken about this before, making sure that we take the initiative, right? We can't just expect everybody to think we are going to be a commercial leader, a strategist driving growth and performance if all they've ever known is traditional HR. So we can't, and most of us have, like most of our early career, mine was certainly exposed to frustration from engaging with HR, and I was reluctant even to move into HR as a profession. And my first operational role that was HR was thankfully within a startup where there was nothing that had gone before, so I was able to reinvent a few of the wheels. But that's really the problem. We can't expect everyone else just to now think, oh, HR are saying there's something different, so we'll treat them differently. We have to show value. So my view on that is, if you're, and I particularly focus on startups and scale-ups. Let's be clear, I don't do a lot of work with corporate, largely because I think it's like the difference between trying to turn the Titanic versus a speedboat. And so there's a lot more immediate change that we can have by resetting the base and resetting the role of HR and people within startups, and we can trying to get the Titanic of those corporates to shift. And I'm just going to put a pin in that because there's a little thread that I want to come back to,
There's a couple of threads I'd love to come back to too.
Well, I'll stick on that one just for a second. And so the reason why I think it's not sensible for us to try and start changing HR in corporate is because there's first of all, it's very deeply ingrained, like the traditional ways of working. But also when you start to operate on a scale of that magnitude, when you've got thousands of employees across the globe, standardization becomes operationally efficient. So you can see why there is a default to more traditional HR standardization of policies and process, make sure that everything is looking and feeling the same for everybody. But of course, when you build for everybody, you build for no one. So we have a challenge, this idea of the post HR generation, right, and operating more like a product team. We have the challenge of how do we scale that? So how do we actually scale that into the corporate environment? Because it's not going to be a quick and easy transition, and it may not be the right transition. That's also a question that we should ask. And then a second question that, sorry, I'm just throwing loads of threads at you, but a question that I've been asking a lot of people recently is it even healthy to have organizations of that size? And are we letting businesses get too big? So there's all
Ooh.
sorts going on there. But to
A
come back, just
big, yeah. I mean, where do we start? We could
just
probably do about 3 episodes on this, I think.
to round off your actual question, I think that the onus should be on us as the HR. If whatever we're calling ourselves, it's irrelevant. But as the person coming in who is the HR or people person, it's actually our job to make sure that we have defined our role clearly and that we have understood the top priorities of the business, we've understood the top priorities of the teams within that business, and we're aligning our activity to enable those functions and the business more broadly to execute on its top priorities. And we do that by building an exceptional people experience product that is both aligned to high performance and creating experiences that people want to share. Like the two have to be side by side. But the onus is on us to answer your question. And I think that not enough HR people take that initiative.
Lots and lots of threads there, but I'm going to pick on one actually, having experienced it myself. So when I was in corporate, I wanted to move into a startup slash tech space because I understood it to be a different environment. I understood it to be more open, more agile, more transparent, more product led, people first, all the lovely stuff that you've just talked about. But I couldn't move because my experience was so very traditional and in traditional spaces. Coming out of that as a freelancer, I've been able to work with startup tech super quick. But obviously, I have to do the work to find those clients. Do you think that whilst it would be moving Titanic to change it in corporate, do you think that there's something to be done with the role in corporate to gently start to change the view of people roles?
There's nuance to all of this, right? So I'm just going to be a bit controversial here. So the first question I'd ask is, why would you want to pursue a career in corporate, knowing that it is a fast track, even if you're successful, to misery? Like the people that are in the people that are in those positions, those top positions in corporate, I would argue that most of them don't have a high quality of life. And this is a controversial statement, and maybe not grounded in any research that I can quote. But my experience of corporate and trying to pursue a career in corporate was miserable. Right? It's a thankless task. It's highly competitive. It's cutthroat. There's you're it's a finite game too, right? So you're chasing the next pay rise, the next promotion. It's not great. Like for me, like that would be my first question for anyone
I'm
who
going to
wants to do that.
challenge that in a
Yeah,
minute. Can
yeah,
we
please
can we
do.
just pause there for a moment?
Yeah,
Because I think whilst I've had different experiences in corporate, I've also had some wonderful experience in corporate. The people that I've worked with have been phenomenally intelligent, bright, open humans.
100%.
And perhaps I agree that the structure can sometimes be a bit miserable, but I wouldn't say that I've been miserable in those spaces. I would say that I'm enjoying more creative freedom right now. And I think it does depend on the individual as to how you work too. So, knowing quite a few people that I know that are very comfortable in that space because it gives them those boundaries and that structure, actually, it's not very miserable for them because
Yeah,
they enjoy how that kind of habitual kind of this is what we're doing, this is what we're working towards. And I think also the purpose of what they're doing for their clients. Lots of people that do well or excel in those spaces, I think, are client service, like excellence in client service is what they strive for. So it's interesting to see how your experience. Obviously, I understand your experiences with startups because it is so very different. So yeah, I would challenge that a little bit.
yeah.
I don't think everybody I've met in corporate is
No,
miserable.
no, no. I certainly didn't mean that to be the case, and I was deliberately using hyperbole, I guess, to make the point. But it's not that everybody in that environment is miserable, and you can have a very happy and stable existence within that. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about people that want to pursue the career ladder, people that want to push for the top positions, that want to secure board seats, that want the CEO job, that want the C-suite job. That's a different path altogether, and it is a path that is going to force you into territories that will make you uncomfortable and not always in the nice way. And you're almost certainly going to have to work more hours at a greater intensity than those around you, for no guarantee of reward because of the level of competition for those seats at the top. So
So, question: do you think that route to shaping a business, to being a CEO, to being in a board seat, to changing what HR looks like is quicker, faster, more exciting in a startup? I
for
think
me,
I
it
already know
is.
the answer.
For me, it is because so I'll answer this in two parts. So for me, it is because the effects are more immediately visible and tangible. The startup scale ups are closer to the product market fit part of their journey, which means they understand the vernacular, the processes, the methodologies, the mindsets around, when we start to talk about, actually, we are a mini startup within this business. We also have ideal customer profiles. We also have products that we are a central subscription product that we are creating, and we're looking to ship increments of that to improve. We're doing, iterative incremental development. We're working in sprints. Like the startup language and comfortabilities, there's a greater match there, which means you can have a more immediate and tangible impact. There's also just a more naturally bigger scope. So when I talk about, the corporate being a finite game, you usually have a particular role and career path that you might zigzag a little bit, but it's usually more linear if you choose that. And your role is going to be narrower. And yeah, you might go deeper on that, but it's going to be narrower. So for me, I like the freedom that startups provide, and I find a lot more joy in that, and the impact's more tangible. Second,
Oh,
second part of my response is on the corporate side, and this is another controversial question: is it the right thing to change what HR is in the corporate environment? Because in a corporate environment, like I said, standardization is operationally efficient. It's not where I would thrive. It's not where I want to be, but it is operationally efficient to standardize processes when you're talking about scale. So it's a nuanced conversation that isn't black and white, I don't think, or clear set, or this is the only way to work, and that's not. So the post HR generation for me is not just about should all HR change. It's for those who don't want to do the traditional way and finding and building a path and creating value in a different way. So
Lovely. So takeaway maybe is leaning into who you are and what
yes,
fits for you and
right,
finding the right fit. Um, and I think that that's definitely been a theme that's shown across a few of the episodes, actually, in that actually what it comes down to is what does it feel like in your gut? Do you feel comfortable? Do you enjoy it? Does it work for you? Or do you want to explore something different?
yeah.
Tell me about leveraging tech
Hmm.
for business optimization. So I have been delighted to download your recent employee handbook that you designed in a 24-hour podcast live. No small feat. And you are part of a small, mighty, growing army of people that are sharing content and knowledge every day, which is phenomenal and also unusual, I think.
It's the an offshoot of the startup culture actually, because so in startup culture it became quite common for people to open source their work, like so coders and developers to open source. That became quite normal, like open source ways of working, open source code. And actually, the open source movement in progressive people ops is a direct offshoot of that, in the sense that we realize that everybody and the profession progresses more quickly the more that we share. So it benefits everyone to create as much open source resource and content that helps progress the way we think and work within in the profession, and helps everyone that moves into the profession deliver greater impact more quickly, because they don't have to start with a blank page. They don't have to start with now I've got to go find all the answers. There's a community that is growing, as you say, that is open sourcing their work. So we've got people like, Marie and Lauren Gomez that open sourced what they did at Learnably, and Marie also just published the Agile Project Toolkit as well for people to pick that up and to use as a template to work in their team. We've got Jessie Swan and all the great work that she does in open sourcing. You've got the open org guys, Adam and John, who are constantly curating open source content and sharing it. I do my own versions of that and have other projects in line. My 100 for 100 project, which is essentially will be 100 interviews with 100 heads of people startups, which will be turned into a open source Notion site, which will host those conversations, the key takeaways, and a guide for a first time head of people for their first 100 days based on all that learning. It's an amazing time to be in the profession. And so I think the reason that we've gone this way is because of the open source culture in tech startups more broadly. And I think we've just realized that everybody progresses more quickly the more that we share with each other. So it's very, very cool.
I mean, I love it. It's super exciting to be able to see that kind of learning and content, especially when you've got a traditional background and you're working in a new space. Do you think, though, and this is the thing that I love about it, the connection and the community aspect of it, which perhaps we've been missing. I certainly think that sometimes we missed that during the pandemic, and that made it very difficult for people, particularly in the people profession, because chances are we're a people person, people first, as you say.
Mhm.
So that value as a core value of everything that you do is really special. Um, but do you think that also means that, let's say you've got a board seat for each of those startups, you
Mhm.
then are able to sit on there as a people person and say, that's all of these, like the admin and the ops taken care of. Let's talk about the good stuff.
Right. Yeah, well, yeah, it definitely helps because it means that you're not having to start from scratch. I definitely, even with all the open source stuff, I don't advocate for a copy and paste, but at least you're not starting from scratch. So you can take inspiration, you can take templates, you can go, okay, that worked over there. What could that look like here? So it definitely helps. I think more broadly, it's about developing when we start to talk about moving into board seats and getting HR representatives at the board table and at those higher strategic business levels, it's more about developing your broader business acumen, like actually recognizing the role that the people function plays in scaling a business and how you can leverage the language of sales and marketing and product to present data in a way that your stakeholders actually understand, so they can start to connect the dots in a way that it makes sense to them. So rather than presenting, you know, endless, realms of we don't have a data problem in HR. Like, we've got tons of data, but we just don't know what to do with it, and we don't know why we're measuring it, and we don't know how to present it in a way that is meaningful. When you start to adopt product principles and marketing and sales principles, you can start to put that into the correct context and framing, using the same language as your peers that you want to see you as a peer, but at this point a lot of them don't, because they don't see HR as a commercial function. It's a way of elevating using tech to gather the data and then presenting it in a way that actually means something.
I love that. Using tech to gather the data and then present it. And that's your X, right? So increasing the potential by using it in the right way, communicating it in the right way. Luke, how do you support yourself in this space? What do you do to take care of you?
That's a great question. The community itself is a great buoyancy aid, right? So I think the consequence of sharing is that people share with you, and they want to people want to speak to you quite a lot. So that's useful. I've got a close group of there. So let me just reset. So I class myself as a solopreneur, right? So I started out as an entrepreneur, thinking that I would build a business of people and teams and scale services and maybe even get investment and build a tech product. I quickly realized I didn't actually want to do that for a number of reasons. The main one being that freedom is really important to me, and that taking those traditional startup options would actually restrict my freedoms if I wanted to do it justice, and if I brought people in, give them what they needed. So I now am an intentional solopreneur scaling a business of one, which means that I intentionally don't have a team of people around me. But I have found that you're not alone in a solopreneur venture, and you almost end up having colleagues and peers and almost fractional co-founders all over the place as you start to develop relationships. So Ruth Penfold Brown, who I think is on the series or has been on the series.
Yep,
Yep.
she's going to be on. Yep.
So Ruth Penfold Brown has been a really good friend of mine for a long time. We developed our relationship as she coached me through a transition phase in my career and helped me rediscover myself, and is a good reason why Sapien X exists now. Actually, was that work that she did with me, and we ended up pretty much launching our solopreneur ventures at the same time. So we've been sort of side by side, looking after each other. Adam and John at OpenOrg have been awesome. Charlie Hunt has put together a community of founders in the people ops space. Alex Hillary as well invited me to a closed people ops creator community. So there was it's kind of disbanded now, but there was about sort of 15 of us in there that were all doing similar things and were supporting each other. So I guess the short answer is community and network. And I think if it can be the loneliest job in the world to be the people person, particularly in a startup scale up. Right? If you are the people person in a startup scale up, it really is one of the loneliest places to be. So you do need to proactively invest in community.
Find your network.
Find your network, find your people, as I say. In fact,
Yeah.
that phrase was coined in one of my cohort programs because someone in it said, "I feel like I found my people." I was like, "Yeah, I think that's right."
So I feel actually that I'm about to unpick what you've said, because my question is usually 3 things that you would focus on if you were coaching someone. But from talking to you, I think so exploring what fits, finding your people, communicating and networking with those people and sharing. And then I would love to just touch on a final thing that I read that you wrote yesterday, which I absolutely loved, and I think it's something that any HR professional and anybody could use,
Mhm.
whether they're in corporate or startup. Now, you wrote about your 90-10.
Mhm.
Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Yes, so that was a post specifically about where I find inspiration and where I spend my time consuming content and learning. And in my post, I said I probably consume around 90% non-HR content with a 10% layer of HR and people ops content. And the reason for that is that the the role of a people person is, like we've spoken about, is not to administer policies. And if you only spend your time in HR content, traditional HR content, learning about the latest policy and legal change and whatever it might be, you're actually missing a massive opportunity to advance your level of understanding and your level of impact on the business more broadly. So for me, that 90% of content comes from product. So good podcast is the Product Ops podcast. It's a great podcast where you can listen in to actual product people talking about the process and see what works. I listen to a lot on, as you can imagine, on marketing, content creation, and what I've become obsessed with, which is flywheel marketing, because
Okay.
I'm a huge advocate for, and I teach it in my program and my course, to create your people product as a flywheel of value, creating virtuous loops, which we can talk about. If you want me to talk flywheels, I can. But I would not have known about the power of flywheel had I not been looking at product and marketing methodologies and understanding the business more broadly, like the mechanisms of finance and how is a business financed? What do I need to know from a financial literacy perspective about the workings of a business beyond the HR function? Like actually, what do I need to know so that I can align what we're doing to that? Because if we don't fully understand, if we don't understand the end-to-end mechanisms of a business, it's very difficult to have a significant strategic impact on that. So for me, it's about understanding business more broadly and recognizing, particularly in startup scale-ups, everyone there is an entrepreneur. Everybody in that business is an entrepreneur. So they might not have founded the company, but they're there because they are entrepreneurially minded. And what comes with that is a greater sense of your um, the holistic mechanisms of that startup ecosystem and how your role plays with that one, and how we have to be lean and agile, not as buzzwords, but as a mindset. Like literally, we need to have a plan, but we can't be too fixed on how we're going to get there. So we need to be able to move and twist and turn and work incrementally. And all of this stuff that you learn as soon as you immerse yourself in non-HR content, and particularly product sales marketing content, it's about making yourself a well-rounded business person first, I think, and then how do you use that acquired knowledge to maximize the impact of the people function relative to how that fits within the wider business strategy and structure.
I think that mindset shift is such a great takeaway for anybody that's interested in climbing the ladder in whatever space they're in. Because certainly, whenever you're sitting in role, I think the tendency is to look at, well, how can I develop my specialist skill in this space, but actually understanding the business. And as a solopreneur, you're your own board, right? So you need to
Right.
understand all of it. But being able to help businesses or be able to add value in the business that you sit in is about understanding how it operates,
Yeah, exactly
and
that.
every single part of or function that feeds into that.
And I said in
Um,
the just to tag onto that, because it's relevant to that mindset piece. I said in the newsletter yesterday that if you're seeing your people function as a startup within the business, then you see the other stakeholders differently. So the SLT become your board, like they are the board, and the founders can almost play the role of investor, if you like. That sort of like you can start to put people into slightly different categories rather than them being just the VP sales, VP marketing, whatever. You all of you are a board, you know and while you might not be the official board for the for the company, you should be taking that role, and you can
yeah,
start to change the way you interact with that group and the way which you position yourself with that group differently if you see yourself in that light.
Amazing takeaways, Luke. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing a bit about your journey and what inspires you, because I think that's really going to inspire other people actually. And we will include in the show notes all of the people that you've mentioned and all of the reading and podcasts, because I think that's certainly for me, having followed you on LinkedIn, lots of those things have been great for me too. So thank you. Just a last thing that I would love to hear from you, either a book or a piece of music that tells us a little bit about Luke.
Oh, okay. Well, it would be really easy to go. So the book that I'm going to say is the one that set me down this path. So The Lean Startup by Eric Ries was the book that really unleashed me into this way of thinking. So from a book, Eric Ries, The Lean Startup, if you consume that through the lens of I am an entrepreneur and I'm going to apply these principles, that's going to get you a long way because it will start to change the way you work fundamentally. Piece of music, that's interesting. So I actually shared in a post a few weeks ago. So a piece of music that has been a defining piece of music for me particularly since making the decision to go solopreneur. It's called Elevate. I can't remember the artist, but basically it's one of the it's multiple artists is why, but it's one of the theme tracks for the Spider-Man multiverse movies. So
Okay.
my brand aesthetic is infused with Marvel and superhero imagery because ultimately I think the people profession and those who are in it are superheroes. So that's one of the reasons. But I love to watch that with my son. He loves them, and that particular bit of music, Elevate, the opening verse really sets the tone for what I'm trying to do, and often I'll start my day with that. And so I think that it's called Elevate. If you put Elevate Spider-Verse, you'll find it. But it's a very upbeat, energetic song. But crucially, the lyrics speak directly to me and what I'm trying to achieve, and figuring it out on your own and forging a path, and all of the imagery that comes with that. So I'd say that's the piece of music right now that
Okay.
is the one that
Brilliant. We'll
very
definitely look that
inspires.
up. Yeah. Luke, you've been brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing openly with us. And yeah, really great to have you on. Thank you.
Total pleasure. Thank you.